So this morning, I'm going to kick off a brand new series, and we've simply entitled it, But First, Jesus. We're going to be talking about, over the next 6 weeks, daily rhythms. And I'm going to set a foundation today for what we're going to be exploring over the next 6 weeks, what this is going to look like, and also give you a why. Why are we talking about this? Because some of the things that I'm going to bring up today might quickly trigger some of you, or you could take it in a direction of, well, this is just like a legalistic checklist of things to do. And I hope to paint a picture that rather than talking about these in terms of disciplines or boxes you need to check to be in good with God, these are actually helpful rhythms to invite His presence on a daily basis. Now, I want to make the disclaimer up front. I think coffee is a legitimate part of a daily spiritual rhythm with Jesus. All right? That is like inbounds. I'm okay with that. But the other disclaimer I want to make, because all of this will fit either way. Everything that I'm describing as we dive into these daily rhythms does not have to be in the morning. Some people might make a case, well, you really need to start your day in that place. I'm not going to put that on you as a legalistic requirement. My encouragement to you, because we want to express freedom, we are free from the law, but we want to develop daily rhythms with Jesus, whether that's in the morning, in the middle of the day, or at night. But the point is, whatever your personality wiring is, if you are a morning person, then I would say when you get up, make time. But first, Jesus. If you're more of a night person, I would say before you lay down and go to bed, but first, Jesus. And we're going to make this really practical. We're going to explore some specific things we can do. But I want to start with an illustration. If you think, how many of you here are musicians? How many of you have listened to music? Right? Okay, so that probably catches everybody, right? Music is somewhat dependent upon rhythm. You can have the most talented person in the world, whether it be a guitar player or a piano player, but if that person doesn't have good rhythm, talent can sound like chaos, right? And we just kind of instinctively understand this, that there's nuance there, right? But you need a consistent rhythm to make beautiful music. That's why, just if you want to just pray and agree with us, we're praying for more people to join our worship community, because we would love to have somebody playing the djembe or the cajon or plucking the bass guitar to help increase the rhythm. In the ancient days, sometimes worship was like just the drum. Can you imagine that? Like just having a rhythm and then the voices was enough. So that's just a side plug if you want to pray with us about more people coming and joining the worship community, because we want to open that door. Rhythm is required for talent to make beautiful music. And what we're going to discover as we go through this series is that we were designed to live in rhythm with God. Now, that can easily bring up questions of, well, what does that look like? So if you don't have a clear picture of that, just stay with me. We'll get there. But I just want to start with this thesis statement. We were designed to live in rhythm with God. Now, where we started this morning with that question, I think part of the reason I had this sense is because the Lord's been talking to me about how we live rushed and disordered lives. Now, that looks different for all of us, but there's constant hurry in our lives, in our culture. How many of I'm dating myself and like revealing a genre that you might not know I grew up listening to. I'm in a hurry to get things done. I rush until life's no fun. All I really want to do is live and die, but I'm in a hurry and don't know why. Right? Isn't that like capture the spirit of our lives many times. Sometimes we're rushing and we're pushing and we're hurrying and we're disordered, and sometimes we stop and it's like, I don't even know why I'm living my life this way. And this is the invitation that Jesus has before us today, to actually slow down and walk in unforced rhythms of grace with Jesus. Psalms chapter 1, the verses 1 through 3 says, "Oh, the joys of those who do not follow the advice of the wicked, or stand around with sinners, or join in with the mockers. But they delight in the law of the Lord, meditating on it day and night." And I love verse 3 because this tells you the result of living that lifestyle. "They are like trees planted along the riverbank, bearing fruit in each season. Their leaves never wither, and they prosper in all they do." Now, if we can picture that, I think all of us would say, I would love for my life to look like that picture. I would love to not weary and wither and tire. I would love to bear fruit in every season. I would love to prosper in all the things that I do. But what is that the result of? It's the result of cultivating a life of intimacy and allowing Jesus to slow us down. And what this is going to look like for us is creating intentional space. Tammy, I'm going out of order here, but if we're designed to live in rhythm with God, we need to create intentional practices that create space for His presence to transform us. That's our part. See, Jesus is ready and willing. He wants to walk with you. He wants to change things. He wants to help your life slow down and be more ordered. He wants to provide a nice, steady rhythm to your life that brings freedom. And our part of entering into that partnership is to engage in intentional practices that create space for His presence to transform us. I'm just going to slow down. Sometimes it's hard to practice what you preach. And I am excited, but I want to slow down I don't want to blaze through this. Let's stop and look at this need for rhythm a little bit. We see it, first of all, in creation. We see rhythm in creation. I love the creation story. How it goes through in order and with a certain level of symmetry through each day as God brought things into being and He created all that exists. And I especially love that He stops at the end of each day and says, "That's good. I like that." How many of you, now I know we're not all artistic, but if you're a person that creates things, that's not always the case. Sometimes you create something and you're like, well, that one didn't really turn out. But do you understand the feeling of joy and peace and accomplishment when you create something and you can step back and say, wow, that's actually good. That's how God feels about you and the things that He created. And then He established in His rhythms of creation that on the seventh day He stopped and He rested. From the very beginning of creation, God was establishing a pattern and a rhythm for rest. We see these same rhythms repeated in our very humanity. Nobody here doesn't need the rhythm of sleep. Now, we struggle with it sometimes. We don't always do it well. We don't always do it when we need to, or maybe we do it more than we need to at times, but our very humanity has rhythms built into it. We need to eat on a regular interval to fuel our bodies. And the same, sometimes we skip meals when we shouldn't, and sometimes we have a little bit extra at dessert, and maybe that's not helpful. But the rhythm of needing to fuel your body is there. It's just inherent in creation. We were designed to live this way, to walk with Jesus, to create, to engage. I keep wanting to say create. We don't need to create the practices. We need to engage practices that create space for His presence to transform us. This is like basic human nature. And the world is trying to train us and model us, honestly, into a disordered life. You know, the enemy's not creative. He doesn't have anything original. He simply comes and distorts what God created as perfect and beautiful. And God created things in order. He took the chaos and made it orderly. He created rhythms for life and rest and peace and blessing and life with Him. And the enemy's only play is to try to twist, manipulate, disfigure, change the image, right? He doesn't have any like original programming. But we have to understand that we have to be intentional to engage these practices. And the best place to look is at our primary model, Jesus. Because Jesus actually modeled these rhythms in His life and ministry. Excuse me, I may have drank that coffee a little bit too fast. In the Gospel of Mark, now we're not going to read the whole story, I'm just going to tag this one verse, but I'd love for you to go back and read a little bit more. In the first chapter of Mark, we see this little place here in verse 35 where it says, before daybreak the next morning, Jesus got up and went out to an isolated place to pray. Now this follows Him doing like significant ministry. And the way Jesus did ministry was tiring, right? Like, especially as He became more popular, as the word spread, you know, it's like people are always looking for Him. And we see this over and over again. Jesus would go minister in the power of the Holy Spirit, and then He would withdraw to spend time with His Father. Because Jesus didn't do anything in His ministry except what He saw His dad doing, what He heard His dad saying. And so in order for that relationship to work, they had to spend time together. How many of you know that if you are not intentional, the craziness and the busyness and the demands of life will not leave you leftover time to be with Jesus? You have to carve that out with a high level of intentionality. Now, remember what I said? We're not talking about legalism. We're not talking about God gets mad at you because you skipped a day or this happened. But there is an enemy that doesn't want this process to happen. There is an enemy that does not want your life to get more ordered, to find a better rhythm. So we have to carve that out with intentionality. In Luke 4:16, this is another passage I love. This is Jesus as a young person. It says, when He came to the village of Nazareth, His boyhood home, He went as usual to the synagogue on the Sabbath and stood up to read the scriptures. Now, you could twist this and, make a point where I could stand here and harp about, this is why you should come to church. That's not the point. The point is, Jesus had a rhythm. He had a habit. This was something, it says that he went as usual. He engaged in a practice and He observed the Sabbath. We have to be intentional to create these rhythms following our model, Jesus. A few chapters later in Luke, Jesus and the disciples have been on a ministry tour. Like they've done a lot of things. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm jumping ahead. That's not this one. Jesus says, Father, if you were willing, this is before the crucifixion. My mind was jumping to a different one for later. As Jesus is coming into the realization that He is going to be crucified, and He knows that He's been following His Father's will, He says, Father, if you are willing, please take this cup of suffering away from me. I just have to stop and say, friends, like this is a banner verse. If you follow Jesus, you are not exempt from suffering. Sometimes what Jesus asks you to do is going to include some suffering. The promise is that He will be with you. You will be able to endure because of his strength. You will be able to obey because of his empowering grace. But it doesn't mean that it will be easy. And Jesus, I love the honesty here. He cries out to his Father, Father, if it's possible, if there is any other way, take this cup away. I don't really enjoy doing this. This is hard stuff, God. And he says to the final sentence, yet I want your will to be done and not mine. He's honest with his Father. Father, if there's any other way, let's do it. But if this is it, if this is what is needed for your will to be accomplished, then I say yes, Lord. Did you know Jesus, just like we talk about all the time, Jesus had to live that life? The yes, Lord, he had to live that in reality. You see, these rhythms that we're talking about, they are about cultivating intimacy, not legalism. This is where the freedom comes in. Because, like I said, the church has not always done a good job. I'm talking about the big C church, worldwide, global, historic church. We've not always done a good job of not turning these things into a checklist and making people feel guilty when they don't do them. I'm sure at least half of you have heard me say this from time to time. Somebody will miss a service or be gone, and I'll say, well, I want you to know that I missed you, but I'm not the attendance police. Right? Like that's not my job as the leader to police the attendance and make sure everybody's doing it. No, that's not. We're trying to be family. We want you to want to be here, and we understand sometimes things happen that you can't be here. We want there to be freedom for that, but we want to be intentional that these rhythms and gathering together in this room is just one. But there is something special about experiencing God together. I want to encourage all of us to develop our own set of rhythms of how you connect with God that can be regular, that can be intentional, and I hope over the next 6 weeks to give you some new things to try if you're struggling to establish rhythms. But no matter what your personal rhythms look like, there's something special when people come together and experience God in a shared way, in a corporate way. When we feel God move, when we experience him in worship, when we see ministry happen, having that shared experience is not just an individual you and God thing. It actually helps us bond relationally too, because we've shared that experience together. Jesus is inviting us, he's inviting you to walk with him in rhythms of grace, to move towards having a more ordered life. And I don't have to poll you to say, I don't think any of us are there yet. I don't think any of us feel fully ordered, right? And let me also say, now I'm not going there right now, but rhythms, and then there's also seasons. And so this is the other reason I don't want this to become legalistic, because there might be certain rhythms that you need in this season that you don't continue forever. But with the Holy Spirit's help, we need to figure out, Jesus, what rhythm are you walking with in this season, and how can I partner with you to be more in order with your steps? You know that verse that says, I make plans, but the Lord orders my steps? That's what I think of. It's not about the Lord orders me and tells me no, it's about Jesus is going somewhere. He's doing something, and I want to walk with the same rhythm, the same cadence, in step with Jesus, because I know that will bring the most order, the most peace, and truth be told, even in the midst of suffering, it will bring the most fun that you've ever had in your life. That's a big one that the church has not painted an accurate picture of. I think Jesus is the most fun person, in all of history. Now, does that mean he didn't do hard things and there weren't serious? Yes. He's the most significant figure in all of history for a lot of different reasons and verified by a lot of different events. But life with Jesus is actually the most fun thing you can do, because what happens is you get to see glimpses of his glory. You get to participate with the things that he's doing. And then even as the seasons turn and you enter a time of suffering or difficulty, somehow you're able to endure that with him. And you can realize he's more real. And I don't know about you. Chew. Oh, my music teacher would get on to me for saying chew. Sorry, side note. I don't know about you, but as I start to get just a little bit older, there starts to be a little bit more freedom and peace when the next hard thing comes up. Because the more times you, in these rhythms with Jesus, I'm not saying it's not hard, but somehow I begin to come to a place where when something drops in my life, I can honestly say, God, you know, I didn't vote for this. I'm not in favor of this particular circumstance or this outcome. I'm not sure I understand what you're doing, but God, I have seen you work so many times. There's actually, in the midst of all of the fear and uncertainty, just a little spark of excitement. And you might think, boy, you're crazy. And I might be, to be fair. There's a little bit of excitement because I've began to touch on this prayer. God, I am completely lost and I have no idea what you're about to do, but I'm actually excited to see the unique way that you are going to move in this moment. I am looking at a mountain that I don't have a big enough shovel for, and yet somehow I think you're probably going to do it again. Now that's a weird place, and if you go tell all of your friends that, they might think that you need some counseling. And in my case, they might not always be wrong, but there can become a level, this is touching on like a deep-rooted practice of joy. That even, I used to hear the preacher I grew up under talk about this all the time. You know, we know that we're supposed to have joy in all circumstances. He says that doesn't mean you have to be happy, but it means that the thing that's coming against you is not greater than the joy that lives in you. It's seated in such a deep and real place that I can actually still have at least a glimmer of that joy because I know the hope that I have. See, we as Christians should never come up against anything that I'm not bringing condemnation if you feel this way, because I do sometimes. But we never come up against anything where there's actually like total and utter despair and lack of hope. That's not a reality for the Christian. There is hope. And it doesn't mean that you're going to get the answer that you would like on the timetable you're asking for. Sorry. But it means no matter what happens, the fact that Jesus lives in you cannot be changed. The destination of where you're going with God into eternity and how eternity is coming towards you in the kingdom of God cannot be changed by the circumstance. You might come up against season after season after season of disappointment, loss, despair, anxiety, and all kinds of trouble. And it does not change the unchanging hope that Jesus lives in you now. He has a place prepared for you in the future, and at any moment, those two realities can collide. Now, this is the biggest difficulty for us as believers. To live holding on to hope while being in a season of difficulty. It's hard. And you can literally go from moments where you feel the thrill of the victory to the next moment you feel the utter agony of defeat. But the joy that lives in you, if we cultivate intentional practices to stay in touch with the Jesus who lives in you. I don't know if I've said this to you before, but one of my prayers for you as people is that the Jesus who lives in you would be let out. You know, we love to pray these prayers about heaven coming to earth and all of these things, but sometimes I think we need to actually turn the page and realize we're all walking around with that reality living in us. And we just need to create spaces and avenues for it to leak out. Jesus, now, Sorry, my mind goes to a weird place. It's like Jesus isn't trapped in there. But the reality of what he's doing needs to be put on display. And it starts with us cultivating that inner life. Cultivating, and we're going to get more practical over the next few weeks about, again, introducing you to different practices you may not have tried. We're going to hear some stories from some other folks, so you get a perspective other than just mine, right? But engaging rhythms and practices like silence, solitude, worship, community. There's all kinds of things that we want to develop intentional rhythms of grace with Jesus. But before we worry about getting all of our checklists out and diving into what does this look like for us, let's stop and say, but first, Jesus. Because the best defense against legalism is an intimate relationship with Jesus. Because the more I fall in love with Jesus, the less I'm concerned about the rules. Because I know I can just trust him. And whatever he says and whatever he's doing is not going to lead me astray. So would you stand this morning? We're just going to invite the Lord's presence. And I'd like to start, if you would just join me in spirit. And let's just pray and ask the Lord to lead us, firstly, corporately, as a body, as a community of people, to better engage with rhythms of grace as a body, as a community. We want to do that together, right? And that actually helps us all do it in the silent and solitude places as well. So Holy Spirit, we welcome you. Jesus, I thank you for this community of believers. I thank you for these people. I thank you for the way that you've gathered us and drawn us and called us into this space and into these relationships. And Jesus, we're praying, we're asking, because we know that we are fallible, that you would help us engage practices that keep you first. Would you help us develop rhythms and seasons of grace where we experience and encounter you together?